My boss's old mother lives in a house that does not belong to this century. It stands at the very edge of town, where the pavement thins into cracked gravel and the streetlights flicker as if they are unsure whether they should illuminate what lingers there. The house leans slightly to one side, not enough to collapse, just enough to suggest that it has been listening too long to something beneath it. Its paint, once white, has faded into a tired gray that absorbs light instead of reflecting it. The windows are tall and narrow, their glass uneven, distorting whatever peers out from behind them. No one walks past it unless they absolutely must. Children take the longer route home from school. Delivery drivers leave packages at the gate. The wind itself seems to hesitate before brushing against its walls. Her name is Mrs. Ilara Vance. I only know that because her son, my employer, told me in a voice that sounded rehearsed, like he had practiced saying it without feeling anything. "She's old," he said, sitting behind his polished oak desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And she imagines things." He paused before adding, "I need someone to stay with her for a while, a few nights, just to make sure she's safe." He slid an envelope across the desk toward me. There was something in his eyes, something not quite fear, not quite embarrassment. It looked like avoidance, as if there were things he did not want to remember, and sending me there was a way of postponing the remembering. Inside the envelope was a key, cold and heavy, and a folded sheet of paper with 3 rules written in delicate, careful handwriting that trembled slightly at the edges. Do not open the door at the end of the hall. If you hear singing after midnight, do not answer. If she asks about the boy in the walls, tell her he went home. There was no signature, no explanation. I laughed when I first read it, assuming it was a joke, some eccentricity of an age in mind. But Mr. Vance did not laugh. "She doesn't like being contradicted," he said quietly. "It's easier if you just follow along." "Is there actually a door at the end of the hall?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Yes." "And what's behind it?" He didn't answer. That was the first moment I considered refusing. But I needed the money. And maybe, if I'm being honest, I felt curious. There's a particular pull to old houses and whispered warnings, a foolish human desire to prove that the darkness is only darkness. So that evening, just before dusk bled fully into night, I drove out to the edge of town. The sky was the color of bruised peaches, fading into violet. As I approached, the house seemed taller than I remembered from a distance. The shadows around it pooled thickly like spilled ink. The front gate creaked when I pushed it open. The path to the door was lined with brittle hedges that rustled although there was no wind. When I inserted the key into the lock, the metal felt warmer than it should have. The door opened with a long, aching groan. The smell hit me first. Lavender, dust, old wood, and beneath it, something damp and mineral like soil that had never seen sunlight. The foyer was narrow, the ceiling high enough to feel oppressive. The wallpaper was patterned with faded roses, but the flowers twisted strangely in the dim light, their shapes almost resembling faces if you stared too long. And there she was. Mrs. Ilara Vance sat in a high-backed chair near the parlor window, hands folded in her lap. A thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair fell in long white strands that caught the fading light like silver threads. She did not look fragile. She looked preserved. Her skin was pale but unlined in places where it should have been deeply wrinkled. Her eyes were the most unsettling part, pale gray, reflective, almost luminous. They fixed on me with startling sharpness. "You're not my son," she said. Her voice was soft, but perfectly clear. "No, Mum," I replied. "He sent me to keep you company." "Ah," she said slowly, as though tasting the idea. "Company." Her gaze drifted past me toward the hallway. "Have you met the boy yet?" she asked. The words sent a chill down my spine. I remembered the third rule. "The boy went home," I said carefully. For a long moment, she stared at me. The silence stretched. The house creaked somewhere above us. Then she smiled. It was not a grandmotherly smile. It was relieved. "Oh," she whispered. "That's good. He was so lonely." I tried to keep my tone light. "Is there anyone else living here?" "Only what's left," she replied. I told myself she meant memories. I told myself old people speak in fragments. She rose from her chair without assistance, though I had expected her to struggle. Her movements were slow but steady, deliberate. "I'll show you your bed," she said. The hallway stretched long and dim, lit only by wall sconces that cast a yellowish glow. The floorboards groaned under each step. Portraits lined the walls, old photographs in tarnished frames. Most were too faded to make out clearly, but I noticed something odd. Many of the figures had their faces scratched away. At the very end of the hall stood a door painted black. It was slightly ajar. The darkness inside it looked thick, almost textured. As I glanced at it, Mrs. Vance's hand shot out and gripped my wrist. Her fingers were surprisingly strong. "Do not," she said sharply, her voice no longer soft. "Open that door." "I wasn't going to," I replied, forcing a nervous smile. Her expression softened again, as if a mask had slipped back into place. "Good," she murmured. "It doesn't like new faces." The phrase settled heavily in my mind. "It." She guided me to a small guest room halfway down the hall. The bed was narrow but clean. A single lamp sat on the nightstand. The window overlooked the backyard, where a massive, leafless tree stood with branches like skeletal fingers scraping the sky. "If you hear singing," she said from the doorway, "you mustn't answer." "Singing?" I asked. She tilted her head. "You'll know it when you hear it." Then she left. The house grew quieter as night fully settled. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks that spidered outward like veins. At first, there was nothing. Then came the scratching, soft, slow, not from above, from inside the walls. It sounded deliberate, a dragging motion, pause, dragging again, as if someone were tracing the beams from within. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to listen. The sound moved, traveling along the length of the wall, toward the hallway, toward the door at the end. I told myself it was rodents. Old houses have noises, old wood shifts, old pipes groan. But then I heard something else, a whisper, faint, childlike, too muffled to understand. I stepped into the hallway despite myself. The air felt colder there. The black door at the end was no longer slightly open. It was wider now, just a few inches more, enough to reveal a deeper darkness inside. And then, from somewhere beyond it, came the first note of a lullaby. Soft, sweet, and heartbreakingly sad. It was sung in a woman's voice, thin and trembling, but beneath it, almost woven into it, was another sound. A smaller voice, trying to follow the tune. I froze. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. The second rule echoed in my mind. If you hear singing after midnight, do not answer. I hadn't checked the time, but the house felt like midnight. The lullaby drifted down the hall, brushing against me like cold breath. And then, a knock. Not at the front door, not at the black door, but from inside the wall beside me. 3 slow knocks. as if someone trapped within was politely asking to be let out. And in the parlor, I heard Mrs. Elara Vance begin to hum along. The humming did not stop. It followed the lullaby like a shadow follows a body, inseparable, thinner, but always there. I stood in the hallway with my back pressed against the peeling wallpaper, staring at the black door at the end. The gap between the door and the frame seemed wider than before, though I couldn't be sure. The darkness inside it felt alive, dense, as though it had weight and breath. The knock inside the wall came again. 3 slow raps, not frantic, not desperate, patient. I forced myself to move. Rule 2. If you hear singing after midnight, do not answer. Answer what? The door? The knocking? The song? The humming in the parlor swelled slightly, fragile but steady. It sounded close to breaking, like an old music box that had been wound too many times. I stepped away from the wall. The knocking stopped instantly. The silence that replaced it was worse. It was the kind of silence that listens back. I retreated to my room and closed the door gently, afraid that any sudden noise might draw attention. I locked it, though I doubted an old brass lock would matter much if something inside the house decided it wanted me. The lullaby continued for several minutes, maybe longer. Time felt strange there, stretched thin like old fabric. Eventually, it faded. Not abruptly. It unraveled. One note at a time until there was nothing left but the faint hum of the house settling around me. I didn't sleep much. Every time I drifted toward unconsciousness, I felt the distinct sensation that someone was standing beside the bed, not touching me, not breathing, just watching. I kept my eyes closed, because something deep inside me knew that if I opened them, I would see a face far too close to mine. Morning came slowly, seeping through the curtains in weak gray light. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it had been a dream, until I saw the wall. Just beside the bed, where my head had rested during the night, the wallpaper was torn. 3 thin, vertical slashes, as if someone had tested it from the other side. Mrs. Vance was already awake when I entered the kitchen. She stood at the stove, stirring something in a small pot. The smell of burnt sugar filled the air, sickly sweet. "Did you sleep well?" she asked without turning. "Yes," I lied. "That's good." Her voice was gentle again, frail almost. She placed a bowl in front of me at the table. Oatmeal, overcooked, brown around the edges. "You heard him?" she said. It wasn't a question. My throat tightened. I heard the house settling. She chuckled softly. "He hates being called a house." My hands froze around the spoon. "He?" I asked. She finally turned to look at me. Her pale eyes were clear this morning, too clear. "He's been here longer than I have," she said. "Longer than my son. Longer than my husband." I forced myself to speak evenly. "Who is he?" She sat across from me. "The boy," she whispered. I remembered the 3rd rule. If she asks about the boy in the walls, tell her he went home. But she wasn't asking. She was telling. "He cries at night," she continued. "He scratches because he wants to come out. But he doesn't understand." "Understand what?" "That he already did." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer. "Sometimes," she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hush, "when children are very lonely, they make friends. And sometimes those friends don't know how to leave." I swallowed. "You had a son," I said carefully. "Mr. Vance." "Yes." "And another child." Her eyes flickered. For the first time, something like grief passed over her features. "I had 2, she said. The words seemed to echo. "Twins," she added softly, but one of them stayed. My pulse hammered in my ears. Stayed where? She smiled faintly. In the walls. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. That doesn't make sense, I said before I could stop myself. Her smile vanished. He was sick, she said flatly. So small, so quiet. Doctors said he wouldn't last the winter, but he hated the hospital. He hated the light. Her gaze drifted toward the hallway. He preferred the dark. I didn't want to ask. I did anyway. What happened to him? She looked at me as though I were slow. He went home. The words felt like a test. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said, remembering the rule. He went home. Her expression softened again. That's right, she murmured. But something in her tone told me that wasn't the full story. That afternoon I tried to call my boss. No signal. My phone displayed a single empty bar before flickering to nothing. I stepped outside. The yard was silent except for the brittle rustling of the dead tree. Even there, no signal. It was as if the house swallowed communication whole. I walked the perimeter of the property, trying to clear my head. That was when I noticed it. Beneath one of the downstairs windows, where the soil was softer, the earth looked disturbed. Not freshly dug, but uneven, like something had been buried long ago and the ground never quite settled properly over it. I knelt down and pressed my hand into the dirt. It felt colder than it should have in the afternoon sun. As I stood, I felt it again, the sensation of being watched, not from the house, from below. I stepped back quickly, and that's when I heard it. Not singing, not knocking, a whisper right behind my ear. Don't leave. I spun around. No one. The yard was empty, but the upstairs window, the one at the end of the hall, had changed. The black door's room. The curtain inside it shifted slightly, as if someone small had just stepped away. That night, the singing began earlier, not at midnight. At 11:47, I know because I was watching the clock. This time, the lullaby was clearer. The words were indistinct, but the melody carried a sorrow so deep it felt carved from bone. Mrs. Vance's voice trembled as she sang, and beneath it, a child's voice answered. Not perfectly, not fully formed, but unmistakably there. I stepped into the hallway again. The black door was fully open now. Darkness pooled beyond it like spilled ink. The air was colder near it, so cold that my breath fogged faintly. And from inside that room, I heard something new. Not knocking, not scratching, breathing, slow, measured, waiting. Mrs. Vance stood halfway down the hall, facing the door, her back to me. She was swaying gently, as if rocking an invisible child. He's restless tonight, she whispered. You shouldn't be out here, I said, my voice shaking. He doesn't like strangers, she replied. The child's voice inside the room giggled. It was wrong, not innocent. Hollow, like it echoed from too far away. You need to go back to your room, I urged. She turned her head slowly toward me. Her face looked different in the dim light, younger, less lined, her eyes brighter. He wants to see you, she said. The darkness inside the room shifted, and for a split second, I saw it. A small shape standing just beyond the threshold, too thin, arms too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its eyes were enormous, and they were fixed on me. Don't answer him, Mrs. Vance said softly, but she was smiling. And the thing in the doorway lifted one hand and knocked 3 times on the inside of the doorframe. The knock echoed down the hallway, 3 hollow raps against the inside of the doorframe. Not loud, not aggressive, but deliberate. The small figure in the darkness did not move after that. It simply stood there, its outline barely visible against the deeper black behind it. The air in the hallway had turned painfully cold. so cold that my teeth began to chatter despite myself. Mrs. Vance was still smiling. "He's shy," she said gently. "You mustn't stare. It embarrasses him." I could not tear my eyes away. The shape was wrong. Children are soft in their outlines, rounded shoulders, uncertain posture. This thing was sharp. Its elbows jutted at strange angles. Its neck seemed slightly too long, its head tilted as though listening to a sound the rest of us couldn't hear. And its eyes, they caught the dim light from the hallway sconces and reflected it back, pale and wet. "Mrs. Vance," I whispered, "that isn't—" "Hush," she snapped suddenly, her voice cracking like a whip. The child's head twitched at the sound. The temperature dropped further. I felt it then. Not just fear, but pressure. A crushing awareness that the house itself was paying attention. "He doesn't like to be corrected," she murmured, her tone softening again. "He tries very hard." The small figure shifted forward, not walking, sliding. Its feet did not lift from the floor. The shadows clung to it like damp fabric. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my balance. "This isn't real," I muttered under my breath. "This isn't possible." Mrs. Vance turned fully toward me. In the low light, her face looked impossibly smooth. The deep lines I had seen earlier were faint now, almost gone. Her posture had straightened. She seemed taller. "You think I'm mad?" she said calmly. I didn't answer. "You think grief rotted my mind?" Her pale eyes bored into mine. "But you hear him too." The child's mouth opened slowly, too wide. It did not speak. Instead, the scratching began again, not from the walls this time, but from the inside of the black room, as if there were more than one pair of hands dragging against wood. I felt something brush my ankle. I gasped and looked down. The wallpaper along the lower part of the hallway wall was bulging outward. Something beneath it was moving, traveling toward me. "Go to your room," Mrs. Vance said suddenly, her tone urgent now. "Why?" I demanded. "Because he isn't the only one who stayed." The wallpaper split open with a soft, tearing sound. A small, pale hand pushed through. It wasn't attached to a body. It simply emerged from the wall up to the wrist, fingers stretching, feeling blindly. Another bulge appeared farther down, then another. Knuckles pressed against paper. Fingerprints dented the surface. The walls were full of them. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. Mrs. Vance looked tired suddenly, old again. "Because no one believes mothers," she said. The child in the doorway stepped forward another inch. Its feet crossed the threshold. The moment it did, the lights in the hallway flickered violently. The hands in the walls began to tap. Not randomly, in rhythm. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. Like a signal being sent through bone and wood. "Don't let him touch you," she said quietly. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because then he'll remember." "Remember what?" She looked at me with something like pity. "That he had a body." The child's head straightened slowly. For the first time, I saw its face clearly. It wasn't monstrous in the way I expected. It was unfinished. The features were slightly blurred, as though they hadn't decided what they wanted to be. The nose too faint, the mouth too pale, the skin almost translucent, but the eyes were clear, and they were full of longing. It took another sliding step forward. The air around it shimmered faintly, and then it spoke, not with its mouth, with the walls. The voices came from all around us at once, soft, layered, overlapping whispers that formed a single phrase. "Don't leave me." My heart felt like it might split open. The sorrow in those words was unbearable. Mrs. Vance's lips trembled. "I never did," she whispered back. The walls quieted instantly. The small figure tilted its head again. "You left," the voices said. Her face crumpled. "They took you," she breathed. "They said you were gone." "You left," the house repeated. And suddenly I understood. "You buried him here," I said hoarsely. Her eyes snapped to mine. "I couldn't let them take him," she said fiercely. "He hated the hospital. He hated the light. He cried when they tried to move him." The wallpaper hands withdrew slightly, as if listening. "He died," I said gently. Her jaw tightened. "They said he died." The child moved closer, now only a few feet away. The air around me vibrated faintly, like the hum of distant machinery. "I brought him home," she continued, her voice breaking, "just for one night, just to say goodbye." The house groaned, and he didn't want to leave. The small figure reached out one thin arm toward her. She stepped forward instinctively. "No!" I shouted, but she ignored me. Her fingers brushed its hand. The moment they touched, the hallway exploded with sound. The walls began to pound from within, dozens of hands slamming against wood and plaster. The lights shattered overhead. Glass rained down like frozen tears. Mrs. Vance screamed. The child's form solidified slightly, features sharpening, skin darkening with color. It was becoming more real. "No, no, no," she sobbed. "That's not what I wanted." The whispers changed. Not, "Don't leave." Now they said, "Stay." The hands burst fully through the walls. Arms, thin and pale, reached outward, grasping at air. Not children, not adults, just pieces, fragments of limbs pushing through as if the house itself were made of bodies trying to escape. The black room behind the child pulsed, expanding and contracting like a lung. "You have to send him home," I shouted over the chaos. Her tear-filled eyes met mine. "I don't know how," she cried. The child turned its gaze to me. Its eyes were clearer now, more defined, and filled with something I recognized. Recognition. "You," the walls whispered. Cold realization flooded me. I remembered something then, something buried deep. A story my mother once told me about a boy who died in our old neighborhood, a twin who never made it past infancy, a mother who refused to let the funeral home take him right away, a house at the edge of town, a mother who claimed her son was still with her. I had grown up only 3 streets away. I had played in this yard as a child. The tree in the backyard, I had climbed it once and fallen. I had hit my head on the exposed root near the disturbed soil. I remembered lying there, dazed, and hearing knocking from beneath me. The child's eyes locked onto mine. "You heard me," the walls breathed. Mrs. Vance stared at me. "You came back," she whispered. The hallway trembled violently. The hands lunged. The child reached for me. And this time, I didn't step back. I don't know why. Maybe because I finally understood that fear was not what filled this house. It was grief. The child's hand hovered inches from mine. Up close, I could see faint details forming in its skin, creases at the knuckles, a subtle curve to the nails, a pulse of something dim and blue beneath the surface. It was becoming solid, but not whole. Not yet. Behind it, the black room churned like a throat trying to swallow. The walls pounded harder. Pale arms stretched farther, fingers scraping the air, clutching at nothing. The house trembled with the strain of containing something that no longer wanted containment. Mrs. Vance collapsed to her knees. "I never left you," she sobbed. "I stayed. I sang. Every night I sang." The whispers shifted again, overlapping, warping. "You left. You stayed. You left. You stayed." The contradiction echoed like a broken prayer. The child looked at her, then at me, and suddenly I knew what it wanted. Not flesh, not blood. Witness. It didn't want to drag anyone into the walls. It wanted someone to understand that it had existed, that it had been loved, that it had not simply dissolved into plaster and wood and dust. You were real, I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry. You were here. The pounding slowed. The hands froze mid-reach. Mrs. Vance looked up at me, tears cutting silver lines down her pale cheeks. You were loved, I continued. You were never abandoned. The child's form flickered. Its face sharpened for a fleeting second, and in that second it looked like a boy. A small, fragile boy with wide, uncertain eyes. You went home, I whispered. The words felt different this time, not rehearsed, not deflecting. True. The black room inhaled sharply, like a lung drawing its last breath. The arms in the walls began to withdraw, one by one, slipping back through torn wallpaper, as if the house were swallowing its own memories. The pounding softened into faint tapping. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Then silence. The child stepped closer to me. Close enough that I could feel a cold radiating from it, but it no longer felt hostile. It felt sad. I didn't want the dark. The voices murmured softly, no longer layered and violent, but thin and childlike. Mrs. Vance covered her mouth. I thought you did, she choked. You cried when they turned on the lights. The child tilted its head. I cried because you were afraid. The words pierced the room. Mrs. Vance let out a broken sound, not quite a sob, not quite a scream. All these years, she had believed she was protecting him, from the hospital, from the brightness, from the cold finality of burial. She had brought him home and kept him here, in the walls, in the dark, singing to him night after night, not realizing that grief had trapped him as surely as wood and plaster. The house had become a cradle and a coffin. The black room began to shrink, the darkness folding in on itself. The child looked at me one last time. You heard me, it said, not accusing now, just stating. I did, I answered. Its gaze softened. Thank you. It turned toward Mrs. Vance. She reached out, trembling. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't know how to let you go. The child's small hand brushed her cheek. For a moment, just a moment, the years fell away from her face. She looked like a young mother again, exhausted, but fierce with love. I know, the child said. And then it stepped backward, not into the black room, not into the walls, but into something else. The air behind it shimmered faintly, as if a thin veil had been parted. A soft gray light appeared, not bright, not blinding, gentle, like dawn through fog. The child's form grew clearer in that light, whole, small, human. It did not look monstrous anymore. It looked like a boy who had been very sick and very tired. He glanced once more at his mother. Then he stepped fully into the light, and he was gone. The black room exhaled. The door at the end of the hall swung shut with a quiet, final click. The house stilled. The cold receded. The torn wallpaper hung limply, no longer bulging. Mrs. Vance slumped forward, her hand falling to the floor. I rushed to her. She was breathing, but faintly. Her face had aged again in an instant, the smoothness gone, the lines deep and permanent. She looked peaceful. He went home, she murmured weakly. Yes, I said, holding her fragile hand. He did. A faint smile touched her lips. Good, she whispered, and then she stopped breathing. The paramedics later called it natural causes. Old age, they said gently. Her son arrived before they wheeled her away. He stood in the hallway, staring at the black door at the end. It was open, he said quietly. It's not anymore, I replied. He looked at me as if he wanted to ask something, but didn't. Instead, he nodded once. Thank you for staying. I didn't tell him what happened. Some stories don't survive daylight. The house was sold a month later. The new owners renovated it. Fresh paint, new wiring, bright lights in every room. They tore down the wallpaper in the hallway. They found nothing inside the walls. No bones, no hidden remains, nothing at all. Sometimes I drive past it. The shutters are repaired now, the yard trimmed. The old tree in the backyard was cut down. But every so often, when the sun sets and the light thins into something softer, I think about that night, about grief, about how love can become a cage when it refuses to let go. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment and the world is quiet enough to listen, I hear 3 faint taps, not from the walls, from inside my chest. 3 slow beats, pause, 3 slow beats, as if something small and patient is reminding me that being remembered is not the same as being held, and that letting someone go is sometimes the only way to bring them home.